Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we'll get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and our federal government with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, today we are talking about collective bargaining. It is happening all over the state and the impact of special education on collective bargaining. We've got a reporter who's been covering this, plus an expert on the field today to talk about the impact of special ed and collective bargaining. Plus, we'll take your questions. The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now. And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. You will see that Edgar is not here with us at the moment. He is currently on assignment, taking care of an emergency, a school district emergency. We'll see if we can get him onto the show a little bit later on, or maybe we'll get him into the comment section. But we're so honored to have you with us today. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Really important topic we'll be covering today: collective bargaining and the impact of special education needs on collective bargaining. It's become a subject that has gotten onto the collective bargaining table with school districts and unions. So we'll be talking about that. We've got a reporter from EdSource who's been covering that story. Plus, we've got an expert in the field to talk a little bit about that subject matter as well. Our good friend Rusty Gordon from Region 2 here with us today, first on the chat. Rusty, so good to see you on the show. Let's get you some news headlines. And we talked just briefly just a moment ago about collective bargaining. Several school districts have avoided strikes by coming to agreements with their unions on new collective bargaining agreements that include San Diego Unified and San Francisco Unified, two of the largest school districts in the state. But there are other districts where employees may hit the picket line as contract talks are underway. They include districts like in Washington Unified, that is in West Sacramento, Twin Rivers Unified, that is in Sacramento, and Oakland Unified, among others. Again, we're going to be talking about collective bargaining coming up in just a few minutes. A couple of other stories for you to know about. The Trump administration has dropped its proposed nationwide ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in schools. A lawsuit was filed by the administration, against the administration, rather, by several school districts and civil rights groups after it threatened to withhold money from schools with DEI programs. In April, just of note, federal appeals court justice issued a temporary injunction against the ban, and earlier this month, the district and civil rights groups dropped their lawsuit when they were informed that the Trump administration was ending its efforts to impose the nationwide ban. Also, EdSource reporting today that the Trump administration has filed a lawsuit over a California law preventing new oil and gas wells from being located too close to sensitive areas, which, as you know, include schools. Senate Bill 1137, which went into effect in 2024, creates a safety zone of 3,200 feet around sensitive areas. We told you schools. It also includes hospitals and parks. Now, the Justice Department is arguing that SB 1137 would knock out about 1/3 of all federally authorized oil and gas leases in California. That 3,200-foot zone, just to give you a little bit of clarity, it's close to a half mile. And this was created to reduce exposure to harmful toxins. There are several wells that are already located in those safety zones, but those are grandfathered in as long as they comply with some of the additional federal regulations. So those are your news headlines. Again, want to say hello. Kyla Griffin with us, Tiffany Dietz with us, Korea Adams with us today. Again, go ahead and jump into the chat and let us know where you're watching from. Let's go to our main topic today, because we've been talking about collective bargaining. As we said, there are dozens of districts that are right now in the midst of collective bargaining with their labor unions and management trying to reach agreement on contracts. And one of the topics that is hitting the collective bargaining table is special education. So we've got two experts on the show today to talk a little bit about that subject matter. Emma Gallegos is the reporter at EdSource covering equity issues, and Jeanette Pelletier, Director of Management Consulting Services at School Services of California and former Associate Superintendent at San Mateo County Office of Education. And Jeanette and Emma, thanks so much for being with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Emma, let me start with you. You've noted in your stories a shift in collective bargaining beyond just the wages and the benefits and the working conditions to include special education. Based on the conversations that you're having with educators, has special education reached that point where you have to address it at the bargaining table?
Yeah. No, this has become really important along with those kind of bread and butter wage issues. Yes, special education. What I'm hearing is that, so as a lot of you know, the CTA has launched its We Can't Wait campaign. And one of the issues that they're really pushing on in that campaign are staffing issues. And if you think about staffing issues, some of the teachers that are feeling it most acutely are the special education teachers. So that's been coming up as, part of the campaign across these, 32 school districts. But also what I'm just hearing is that there is just, there's growing numbers of, special education or students who qualify for special education. There's not more funding for it. It's hard to find, it's hard to staff those positions. It's always been hard to staff those positions. And what's happening is that, when they're not being staffed correctly or special education teachers have high caseloads, and they're maybe not addressing everything the best that they can, or it's spilling over. So if you're not addressing student needs, it's not just affecting special education teachers anymore. It's also, it's spilling over into other classrooms. And so I've heard that's a piece of why, other teachers who are, are supporting these teachers, special education teachers at the bargaining table, saying, "Hey, this is something that affects us too."
And Jeanette, Emma just said something that I think is key to this, which is more students are being identified now than ever before, and that's putting a crunch on the staffing. It's putting a crunch on the curriculum. It's putting a crunch just on how districts are allocating their dollars. Can you describe the discussions that you've been having with district leaders, not just through your work with school services, but also as a former educator regarding special education and the extent of the challenges that are involved with respect to these issues?
Yeah, for sure. Emma is absolutely right in all the things that she said. The educators out there are experiencing more and more challenge, greater workload, greater caseloads. For sure, we are seeing a rapid increase in the number of students referred for special education and the number of students who we are then finding eligible for special education. And that has also caused a bubble of eligibility at our early childhood level. So we had this really dramatic return to special education referrals in the year we all came back from distance learning. And those numbers were high across the board, but those numbers have come back down to what would be a normal considered, statistical rate of assessment and referral and eligibility from the 6 to 22 range. But in that 0 to 5 space, we are seeing really almost statistically hard to imagine rates of referral, assessment, and eligibility. And the students who are being assessed and found eligible often have quite extensive support needs, especially in areas of behavioral need. They weren't exposed enough and didn't have a lot of early childhood opportunities for exposure. And so they have a lot of behavioral needs. And we also are seeing a real increase in the extensive support needs of students with more severe disabilities, such as along the autism spectrum autism spectrum, or with students with other physical health needs. So those are definitely things we're seeing. In terms of, again, what Emma said about the staff, we are absolutely seeing staff feeling like the number of students they're serving is a challenge, even if their class sizes haven't risen. Because of the challenges of the students, the need for more support services in behavior, in case management are growing. And as she said, because we have sometimes challenges filling those positions, we may have unfilled related services specialists, delays in filling positions for classified staff. And so overall, the burden, the pressure on our educators really does feel like it's growing and seems like it's growing, even when our class sizes haven't actually grown that much.
Mm-hmm. Emma Gallegos is a reporter at EdSource covering equity issues, and Jeanette Pelletier, former associate superintendent at San Mateo County Office of Ed, and currently with School Services of California. If you have any questions for Jeanette or Emma, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and tackle some of those near the end of the show. Emma, let's talk school budget, because the governor had his budget proposed and now the legislature is going through it. But in his January budget proposal, it included a $509 million increase in ongoing funding for students with disabilities to support special education base rates. To what extent does this proposal address challenges related to staffing and caseloads as far as we know right now?
So there's nothing in this proposal that specifically addresses, these issues. That being said, it is more money for some of these, SELPAs that have not been getting the same amount of base funding as some of their neighbors. And sometimes there's been these like really drastic differences, one getting almost double what another one is. And so, insofar as it's kind of equalizing those rates, obviously those SELPAs are going to be the ones that are better able to address some of these issues with more funding. So it's indirect, but it might be very direct if there's a SELPA area that's trying to address some of these issues. They have more funds for it, and that might be quite a bit for some and not as much for others too. So yeah.
And Jeanette, as districts have come to reach their agreements on these, new labor contracts, but even other districts that are working through some of the budget crunch that they have as they create their budgets for the upcoming year, we're seeing districts announce that there's going to be layoffs, dozens, hundreds in some cases. Mm-hmm. When it comes to is this almost like a domino effect? With these labor contracts and addressing some of these new issues, they come to an agreement, and then it's an unintended consequence that now we have to kind of address some of these staffing issues.
Yeah, well, I'm not on the bargaining unit support team here at School Services. I'm on the special ed team, but I do think it just makes sense that sometimes when districts are going to make investments in their educators to keep as many as they can and at the highest rates of pay or with the benefits that the teachers are pushing for and asking for, that it makes sense as a layperson in that area to know that if they're going to have more educators have higher rates of pay, there may be a need to make reductions in other areas. When I'm going around the state, some of the things that I see in the special education space are that lots of districts actually don't have a lot of staff that they could elect to release. They're already utilizing contracted service providers to provide related services such as speech and language support, sometimes occupational therapy, even school psychologists. And those costs can be actually much higher than employees. So I do think that some districts are trying to leverage how to improve recruitment and retention so they can move away from higher cost contracted employees. I also think that a lot of the growth in special education personnel has been in the classified service. We need many more support providers for classroom environments for individual students, and specifically for those behavioral needs that I noted. And so lots of districts are finding that they need to reach outside of their employees again to contracted providers. So that's an opportunity where they may be able to, and rather than release people, to move from contractors to employees. But when I'm going around the state, we are hearing from special education staff that the things that they really are interested in bargaining agreements are things like acknowledgement of their workload, not just their caseload. The fact that they have a student on their caseload who might need many more minutes of intensive service really makes that a different experience in the classroom than for example, a student who gets 30 minutes of speech a week does not require the same amount of preparation and support as a student who has active assistive technology, augmentative communication needs, and may need as much as 30 minutes per day of support from a speech specialist. So really thinking about what that workload is, which really dovetails into that new law that went into effect in January, thinking about workload and caseload balance for at least for initial assessments. Those assessors who are doing initial psychs and resource specialists have been really impacted by the number of new assessments. So those are issues that we're hearing about from the special educators, that they really need consideration of how much time and effort it takes to provide a high quality compliant IEP program.
And Jeanette, let me just get some clarification here on a couple of things that you said. One, you talked about the challenge of not having the staff. I have to assume that this is a much bigger challenge in the smaller and rural districts where the group of teachers is not necessarily as robust as in some of the bigger districts. But you talked about the growth has really been in the classified area and not necessarily in other areas. Can you just maybe give us a lens on why it's been the classified and not necessarily those that have as much of the intervention work?
Yeah, well, one of the things that the special education programs that I've been connected with, and when I go to SELPA and talk to across the state for SELPAs, is that one of the results of not having sufficient staff or having students who missed a couple of years of early intervention is that families and teachers are really in a space where they're operating in sort of a perception of scarcity. It feels as if there's not enough support in their classrooms. Some of that's because of behaviors and intensive needs, and some of that is because the students are far behind and their parents just aren't willing to wait to see if the schools can bring them up. So we have a lot of requests for individualized support from classified staff, individualized instructional assistance, individualized support for inclusive access, individualized support for specific areas of learning and intervention, students with health needs, toileting and other personal care needs often require individualized support. So we're getting a lot of requests in that space. And often those are people in the classified service. And so we're seeing those requests growing directly from parents, directly from staff and administrators at the site level. And in special education land, when you have an assessment that indicates there is a need, then we must provide that. And so we're being sort of forced to provide individualized support because we don't maybe necessarily have the appropriate levels of environmental support. We can't make the argument that we have sufficient support for all. And so then we are then pushed to provide individualized support for one student.
I gotcha. Okay. This question for both of you, and Emma, I'll have you start. Looking ahead, if districts are successful in addressing some of these special education needs through collective bargaining, what do you see as the next major issue that districts will need to confront that ends up on the bargaining table like special ed has in this case?
Oh gosh. The thing about this question is, on both sides, both from the teachers and the administrators, what I'm hearing is that this can't just be solved through collective bargaining. There's been a really big emphasis that special education is a huge issue, and there's only so much that can happen at the local and district level. So that is the trick. So, the federal government famously has not provided the full 40% of funding. I think it's a third of that, and the state isn't providing enough. And so right now, um, it just continues to be a huge issue that some of these districts are only getting their special education funded at 25-30%, and they're still having to tap into their local funds. So that is going to continue to be a problem. How that plays out in the collective bargaining space remains to be seen, but I don't think that's something that's going to go away until some of those kind of outside pressures are resolved. I know that the CTA, but as well, some of the board members and the superintendent from San Diego Unified, they've been going up to the state. I know the SELP administrators have been going up to the state and trying to really push for California to, for more funding. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be solved anytime soon. Yeah.
And Jeanette, your
I would
thought?
agree. Yeah, I would agree that that there is definitely a deep interest in and a need for additional funding for education that will impact special education. But here's where you get the risk of when you invite the special educator to one of these and you ask this question. Every student in special education is a general education student first. They have an entitlement to a rightful presence in the least restrictive environment and to access to high quality first instruction, early intervention and prevention, and access to inclusive environments. And so more funding for special education will have an impact because it will reduce how much general fund contribution may be required. But it is not going to be the area of solution. We need to be ensuring that all of our LEAs are really investing in how they provide early intervention and preventive services for their earliest children. As we're getting so many more children into TK, so many more students attending, we need to be really looking at what is that true universal pre-K to universal TK trend continuum, and how can we target early intervention and preventative practice as early as possible so that as those students matriculate and transition from pre-K to TK into kindergarten, that we are not setting up a situation where they are excluded from their rightful presence in that in general education environment. Students who start in a special education pre-K and go to special education TK and end up in special education K are not exiting from special education with resolved educational needs. They're ending up staying in those environments through elementary and beyond. What we need to do is enhance the access in inclusive settings so that those students get the same exposure. Of course, we're always going to have students with severe and intensive needs that need more exclusionary settings. But I really see a return on investment opportunity in the early childhood education space to really find a rightful place for those students, because districts that are doing a great job here are seeing benefits. Fewer requests for one-on-one aides, better ability to serve students in those embedded environments, fewer compliance complaints, fewer requests for additional services from parents, and successful matriculation into early elementary with either fewer special education services or being back in the general education environment. And if we started there and rolled that success up, I think that we could actually reduce the pressures on special education, serve more of our children in our general education environment, and that really would shift some of that fiscal burden from special education into our LCAPs and our general education budgets where it really belongs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead, Emma.
Oh, if you don't mind if I jump in, that's
Please.
a really good point. Because we talk about special education funds specifically that come from the federal and state government, and that's not enough, and so that's pushing into local funds. And I want to be careful not saying special education students, general education students, because they are connected. And so something that I've been hearing, there are these strict laws and requirements around serving those special education students. And so, I don't want it to sound like, this is taking away from all the other students, because also what's happening is connected is, When you have a smaller local fund, or that pie is shrinking, then you're not able to staff classes maybe the same way, general education classes. And that can also be a stressor that's pushing more students into special education. Maybe someone would do
Absolutely.
better in a class where they had, that was properly staffed. And so these things that you can't really totally disconnect them. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah,
I
totally agree, Emma.
Yeah, I mean, I think the connectivity is very important, and Emma, you are right that you can't fix everything at the state and local level. You said that a couple of minutes ago. So this does seem like an important opportunity for labor and management to really come together and start really pushing the federal government to fully fund these programs and maybe even increase the funding to these programs to support the students. Emma Gallegos, reporter over at EdSource covering equity issues, and Anjanette Pelletier over at School Services of California and the former associate superintendent at San Mateo County Office of Ed. Emma and Anjanette, so good to have you guys here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We look forward to having you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
And folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to be part of our lunch break family. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. When you do, and you turn on your notifications, you'll get instant alerts when we're about to come on the air with any type of breaking news. And then a reminder about our regularly scheduled 1 p.m. shows. And if you have great stories happening in your school districts, we want to tell those stories too. Go ahead and send your news releases, your photos, your talking points to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@axa.org. I'm looking to see if we've got a few promos here. Give me just a moment. Can my team toss in that? There we go. See, we're thinking on the same way. Our Equity Institute, 2026 Equity Institute, coming your way March 25th through 27th at the Westin in Anaheim. Equity for real, anchoring in integrity when the tide shifts. We've got a QR code there for information and registration, or you can go to axa.org/professional-learning. All right, maybe Edgar joins us next time. Hopefully the emergency taken care of. Thanks, folks, so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live and interactive Wednesdays here on ACSA Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.